I want to say something about how this distinction between agency and activity, and maybe how it plays out in city life. I mean, I think my main looking difference between agency and activity is looking at China. You know, in China, in Taoism, there's this thing called the Wu Wei, and Wu Wei means no action. It doesn't mean no activity. It means no action. Yeah, and in this sense, action is goal-directed action. You know, subject, verb, object, goal-directed action, and it's something that plays itself out in the assumptions of the social actor, in people, writers like Max Weber, which themselves are based on neoclassical economics, a neoclassical economics, neoliberal idea, right, of the social actor. And that's something that has grown out of Western culture. And I think we have assumptions of action and not activity, unfortunately. And in China, this Wu Wei is all about, you know, which is one of the fundamental principles of Taoism. Says no action, but it means yes, activity. And activity are kind of background activities. They work out of a situation. So in urban space, they'd work out of a situated urban space. You'd find yourself in an urban space. It's a little bit like situationism in a funny way, you know, that you'd put yourself in a space, you'd look at the possibilities of what you could do, of what that space can do in the context of that space. So instead of coming to a space from the outside with your plans, your objectives, your goals, your means, your ends, that's just what you don't want to do. You want to be situated in that urban space. You want that urban space to demonstrate its propensity to you, and you work with that and out of that. Yeah? And in that sense, you're engaged in an activity. It's not a conscious thing. It's a background thing. It's got to do with assumptions. It's got to do with conventions and habit and things like that. So, and I think that the problem is that urban planning often works with an action model and not an activity model. Especially urban planning, the way that it's dominated by a lot of neoliberal scholars, and even an action notion of property, which is clear and distinct ideas of urban space, urban property, who owns what, where, what's zoned, what you can do, what you can't do. That's the action model. The activity model avoids that. It avoids that. It's a way of producing urban space. It's a way of producing urban space almost unintentionally, but in your everyday activities, you know, whether they're art or whatever you're doing. It's not just, you know, the kind of Taoist Wu Wei, you know, that is this kind of, you know, where we have this idea of activity rather than action. And indeed, you know, kind of the heavy, as I was saying, you know, kind of neoliberal, or almost the assumptions of, they're presuming that we're all like economic actors, you know, neoclassical, neoliberal urban planning. In China, although there is planning, space gets around this planning somehow. And there's a lot of this has to do with actually property rights and urban property rights. And it's partly, of course, regulated by the Communist Party, but the Communist Party is involved in all these weird exchanges anyway. Yeah, it's the local party on the ground who's doing all sorts of informal negotiations with everybody. And it's often unclear, if we're talking about urban space and urban land, who owns a piece of land. You know, in the West, you can sell property, you can buy it, you can sell it, you can destroy it. It's clear and distinct property rights. You can keep people out, you can enclose it. China, it's really hard to do that because often like 7 or 8 different people or different parties will have different entities, will have rights in the same bit of property. Like, for example, there's a famous space in Shanghai Art District, Mogenshonlu. And there you have, like my mate, who's Swiss, has an art gallery there. He's one of the biggest contemporary art dealers in China right now, Lawrence Helbling. He's got an art gallery there, but he hasn't got protected space. He rents that art gallery from a local state-owned textile company, right? Old state-owned enterprise, local state, right? That went bust because nobody's buying the textiles. So they become culture industry entrepreneurs, right? Renting space to people and making a profit. But that same space, you know, there's rights by the district council in that space. A Hong Kong developer bought that big space around there, and he's supposed to try to throw everybody off that land. He wants to get rid of all the artists and make kind of just commodity housing to make loads of money off of rent. Well, he can't do that. The artists are blocking him, the city council's blocking him, but he paid for it already. Yeah. So I mean, not just them. There's an old general, retired Red Army general, living in a house in that same district, and he won't move. He refuses to move. So here you've got 6, 7, or 8 parties having rights in the same space, and you don't know what these rights are. They're often unwritten. Nonetheless, things go on. Yeah, this guy runs his business. He doesn't know day to day what's going on, but somehow it works. Somehow it works economically, and I think it works urbanistically. So it's this kind of blurredness, this wonderful blurredness as distinct from clear and distinct. Again, activity as distinct from agency.